The strangest part of what happened that night wasn't the empty vehicle. It was the timing. I was 26 at the time, staying alone at my aunt's countryside house for a short break. She had traveled out of state, and I volunteered to check in on the place while she was gone. I only had to deal with basic stuff like keeping the lights on, making sure nothing went wrong. The house itself sat far from the main town, between long stretches of forest and narrow, winding roads. In the dry season, it felt peaceful, but during winter, especially when the snow came down heavily, it felt like an entirely different world. That week, we had lots of major weather scares. A major snowstorm was forecasted, the type that makes people lock themselves indoors for a really long while. I wasn't too concerned at first. I had enough food, enough supplies, and honestly, I was looking forward to the comforts of staying indoors. That changed by the third day. The storm came in full force. Snow piled up faster than anything I'd seen before. By the afternoon, the road leading to the house was completely buried. No cars passed. I couldn't even make out distant engine sounds. The network also went MIA sometime during the night. By early evening, the silence didn't feel peaceful anymore. Around 6:30 p.m., boredom got the better of me. I remembered a friend who lived a little over 2 kilometers away. We'd seen each other a few days earlier before the storm got serious. On a normal day, driving there would take less than 5 minutes. Walking, maybe half an hour. At the time, it felt like a harmless idea. I could just show up unexpectedly, we'd laugh about it, and wait out the storm together. Looking back on it, it was a terrible decision. But snow was now falling in light torrents. The sky had cleared slightly, and the world looked almost calm again. Streetlights reflected off the white ground, making everything glow. So I bundled up and stepped outside. For a while, it was actually nice, until I reached the long stretch of road between properties. That was when I had this quiet awareness that happens when you are completely alone. And then, headlights appeared in the distance. At first, I felt relieved. Any sign of life felt comforting in that moment. The vehicle approached slowly, its lights cutting through the falling snow. It was a large road maintenance truck. It wasn't moving steadily, though. There was something off about the way it was being driven. Then suddenly, it veered sharply off the road, straight into the trees. For a second, I just stood there. Then instinct kicked in. Someone could be hurt. I ran toward it. The snow made it harder than expected, each step dragging me down, but I pushed through until I reached the truck. The engine was still running. Everything looked exactly like you'd expect after a crash. I went straight to the driver's side and looked inside. It was empty. I frowned, thinking maybe I couldn't see properly. I moved to the passenger side, but it was also empty. At that point, I felt a strange sense of apprehension. I opened the driver's door and found nothing. I stepped back slowly, my breath starting to come faster. There were no footprints leading away from the vehicle. The snow around it was untouched except for my own tracks. It didn't make sense. Not even a little. And that was when the feeling of unease became even more amplified. I started backing away from the truck. Then I heard a voice behind me. "Please, help me!" I froze. It sounded like a man. My instincts pulled me in 2 different directions. I wanted to turn around, but a part of me refused to help. I'd seen no one in need of help in the car. There was no need to turn around. I kept walking. The voice echoed again. "Wait!" That was enough. I turned and ran without looking back. Eventually, I reached Amara's house, breathless and shaken. She opened the door, immediately realizing something was wrong. I tried to explain everything. At first, she thought I might have misunderstood what I saw. Maybe the driver had gotten out before I arrived. Maybe I didn't notice the tracks. But I knew what I saw, and more importantly, what I didn't see. Her older cousin, who lived with her, decided to call emergency services just to be safe. While we waited, I tried to calm down, replaying everything in my head. That's when something else started to bother me. The timing. The next morning, after the storm cleared, we went back to check. There were no signs of a crash. No tracks, no damage to the trees, just a smooth, untouched blanket of snow, like nothing had ever been there. I stood there for a long time, staring at the spot where I knew the truck had been, where I had heard that voice. And the strangest part, I couldn't shake the feeling that if I had turned around when it called the second time, I wouldn't have made it back at all. The strangest thing about that night wasn't the blizzard, or the empty station, or even the person I saw standing in the trees. It was what I found out the next morning when I went back for my car and realized someone had been there before me. This happened about 8 years ago, when I was 22 and taking evening classes at a small design college outside Black Pine, Vermont. I lived in a quieter town nearly 40 minutes away, so every day I took the train in, went to class, worked a few hours at a print shop near campus, then took the train back at night. It was a routine I knew so well I barely thought about it. During the warmer months, I actually liked it. I would sit by the window, listen to music, and watch the forests blur by. But in winter, that train ride felt different. The sky got dark before dinner. The windows turned black, and the farther we got from the city, the emptier the cars became. This happened in late January that year. Snow started falling while I was still at work. At first it looked harmless, just a soft curtain drifting past the shop windows. But by the time I clocked out, it had turned into the kind of snow that makes the world disappear 10 feet in front of you. I hurried to the station with my coat pulled tight and my scarf wrapped around my face. The platform was packed with people, all of them restless and quiet. When the train finally came, an announcement crackled over the speakers saying it would be the last train running for the night. The storm was getting too dangerous, and all later departures were cancelled. That should have scared me more than it did. I was mostly just relieved I had made it. I texted my roommate, Elise, to let her know I was on the train. She replied that the roads were already bad and told me not to try driving if I could avoid it. That was the problem. My car was parked at a small station lot outside my town. From there, it was usually a quick drive home. But there were 2 ways to get there. The longer route followed the main road around Black Pine Reservoir. The shorter route crossed an old winter access road that ran along the frozen edge of the lake. I had used it once before in daylight. I told myself I would decide when I got there. The train was crowded at first. People stood in the aisles, shaking snow off their coats, muttering into phones, trying to arrange rides home. Stop by stop. The crowd thinned. By the time we passed North Hollow, there were only a few of us left. Then, just past the second-to-last stop, my phone dropped to 3%. I tried to call Elise, but there was no signal. I put the phone in my pocket and stared out the window. When we reached my stop, I was the only person who got off. The doors opened with a hiss. The station was empty. My car sat at the far end of the lot, half buried already. I brushed off the windshield with my sleeve because my scraper was buried somewhere in the back seat. The engine started after a few painful tries, and I sat there for a moment with the heater blasting cold air, watching the snow pile against the glass. I should have stayed at the station. I know that now. But at the time, I kept thinking about my warm apartment, my dry socks, my bed, and how the longer road might already be blocked. So I chose the shorter route. The access road was plowed at first, narrow but visible. My headlights caught the packed tire tracks ahead of me, and I followed them slowly, both hands locked on the wheel. For the first few minutes, everything was fine. Then the road opened onto the reservoir. In winter, Black Pine Reservoir froze solid enough that locals used certain marked paths for crossing. I had seen trucks out there before, ice fishers, snowmobiles, families walking dogs on clear afternoons. But this was not a clear afternoon. This was night, in a blizzard, with no moon and no landmarks. The plowed path stretched ahead like a pale tunnel. On either side, the snow looked endless. Halfway across, my confidence vanished. I realized I had no idea where the path came out. I could not tell if I was still going straight or drifting toward the wrong side of the reservoir. Every gust erased the tire marks behind me. I stopped. The engine idled. The heater clicked and rattled. Snow rushed across my headlights in frantic bursts. Then I made the decision that nearly ruined me. I tried to turn around. The moment my back wheels left the packed path, the car sank. I pressed the gas gently, but nothing happened. I tried rocking it forward and backward. The tires spun and whined, digging deeper. I got out, and the cold hit me so hard it stole my breath. The snow was already over my ankles, and the wind came across that frozen lake with nothing to slow it down. I grabbed a floor mat and shoved it under one tire. It shot out behind the car the second I hit the gas. I tried digging with my scraper until my hands ached. At some point, the edge of the plastic snapped, and my glove tore near one finger. The cold found that tiny opening immediately, sharp and burning. My phone was dead. The car was stuck. And I was alone on the middle of a frozen reservoir in a blizzard. I waited for maybe 10 minutes, hoping headlights would appear. None did. So I started walking. I followed what I thought was the direction back toward town. The wind pushed against me like a living thing. Every few steps I had to turn my face away because the snow felt like needles on my skin. By the time I reached the far edge, I was shaking so badly my teeth hurt. That was when I saw the woods. The road was somewhere beyond them. I knew that if I cut through the trees, I could reach a neighborhood faster than if I followed the shoreline. It was a terrible idea, but so was staying out in the open. So I went in. The woods were darker than the lake. The snow glowed faintly on the ground, but the trees swallowed everything above me. I kept my eyes low, watching my boots sink into the powder. The snow made every step slow and clumsy. Branches slapped my coat. My lungs burned. Behind me, I heard crashing through the brush, fast and uneven. I did not look back until I broke out of the trees and stumbled onto a road. A house stood down the road with one porch light glowing. I forced myself toward it, barely feeling my hands anymore. A man answered after I knocked 3 times. He looked shocked when he saw me and pulled me inside before I even finished explaining. His wife wrapped a blanket around my shoulders. They let me use their landline. I called my apartment. Elise answered, frantic. She said she had been trying to reach me for over an hour. She came with her older brother and they got me home. I ended up with mild frostbite on one finger where my glove had torn, but otherwise I was okay. Ever since then, I've stuck to a self-given curfew. I've always enjoyed taking long walks, especially during Christmas season. It's so calming, relaxing, and feels like a scene out of an adventure novel. But this wasn't one of such experiences. By sunrise, something has happened that I couldn't explain, leaving me shaken with no proof of who or what was responsible. I know most people hate winter storms, especially the kind that come out of nowhere, but I always found them calming. At the time, I was living outside a small town called Elkridge in northern Maine. I was 31, working from home as a billing coordinator for a shipping company, and renting a little place at the end of a road where the houses started spreading farther apart and the trees got thicker. I was not exactly in the wilderness, but I was close enough. A 5-minute drive from my house brought you to a trailhead that led into a dense stretch of pine forest. During summer, people hiked there. In autumn, photographers showed up for the leaves. But in winter, especially at night, it was usually empty. That was part of why I liked it. The night this happened, I had no plans. It was a Saturday, and I had spent most of the day inside, doing laundry, answering a few work emails, and making dinner from whatever was left in my freezer. The forecast had not predicted a snowstorm. I remember that clearly because I had checked it earlier. It was supposed to be cloudy and cold, nothing more. So when I looked up from my book around 10 and saw snow drifting past my living room window, I actually smiled. By the time I opened my front door, the porch steps were already covered. The flakes were large and slow, falling straight down with almost no wind. The road in front of my house had turned white. The trees beyond it looked like they had been painted. I stood there for a while, just listening. Then I thought about the trail. I should have stayed home. I know that now, but at the time it felt harmless. I had done night walks before. I knew the area. I had a flashlight, warm clothes, and boots with decent grip. So I grabbed my coat, gloves, hat, and keys. The drive to the trailhead took less than 10 minutes. There were no other cars in the lot when I got there, which did not surprise me. My headlights swept over the trail sign, the empty gravel pull-off, and the narrow opening between the trees. I parked, zipped my coat, and stepped out. Elle couldn't help but notice how quiet it was. For a second, I almost got back in the car. Then I told myself I was being dramatic and started walking. The trail was easy enough to follow. Fresh snow covered the ground, but the path still dipped slightly between the trees. My boots left deep prints behind me. I remember glancing back a few times and seeing them stretching in a neat line toward the parking lot. I walked for maybe 20 minutes, then I heard a voice. "Hello?" I stopped immediately. For a few seconds, I did not move. I held my breath and listened. The forest stayed silent. I told myself it had been my imagination. Then it came again. "Hello." My stomach tightened. I turned in a slow circle, flashing my flashlight between the trees. There was nothing. That was when I realized something strange. The voice had not sounded like it came from ahead of me or behind me. It sounded like it had come from everywhere at once. I called out, "Is someone there?" There was no answer. I waited another few seconds, then decided I was done. The walk had lost whatever charm it had before. I turned back toward the parking lot. That was when the voice spoke again. "Not down there." I froze. Slowly, I raised my flashlight. At first, all I saw were branches heavy with snow. Then the beam caught a face. A woman was sitting high in one of the pine trees, maybe 15 or 20 feet above the ground. She was perched on a thick branch with her knees bent, one hand resting against the trunk. She looked to be around my age, maybe a little older. She wore a long grey coat, but no hat. Her dark hair hung loose around her face, and snow had settled on her shoulders like she had been there for a while. She smiled at me. I remember feeling relief for half a second, just because the voice finally had a source. Then the reality of what I was looking at caught up with me. She was on a tree. At night. In a snowstorm. And there were no footprints around the trunk. I moved my flashlight down to the ground. Fresh snow covered everything. My own tracks were clear on the trail, but there were none leading to that tree. No scuffed snow, no broken branches, nothing. It looked like she had simply appeared there. I looked back up and asked, "Do you need help?" She tilted her head. "Do I look stuck?" I did not know how to answer that. The branch she sat on was high enough that climbing down would have been difficult, but she did not look afraid. She looked amused. "How did you get up there?" I asked. She pressed one finger to her lips. "That is not the question." I should have left right then. Every instinct I had told me to turn around and walk back to my car as calmly as possible. But there was another part of me, the part that still wanted the world to make sense, that kept trying to explain her. Maybe she was lost. Maybe she was confused. Maybe there was another trail nearby that I did not know about. Then she stood on a branch. "Careful," I said. She looked down at me, still smiling. Then she dropped down from the tree. I shouted without meaning to. She hit the snow below with a heavy sound and disappeared behind a low drift. For 1 second, I thought I had just watched someone get badly hurt. I ran toward her. Before I reached the tree, she rose from the snow in one smooth motion. Then she turned and ran into the woods. I stood there, stunned. I don't know why I followed. And this is the part I hate admitting. Maybe I thought she was in danger. Maybe I was angry. Maybe fear had scrambled my judgment. Whatever the reason, I ran after her, following the direction of her laughter. But when I looked down, there were no tracks. Only mine. Still, I kept going. The laughter drifted ahead, then to my left, then behind me. It moved around the forest in a way that made no sense. I stopped near a cluster of pines, breathing hard, trying to figure out where I was. That was when something landed against my back. I fell forward into the snow. Something pressed against my back, hands grasping at my collar and scarf, a presence overwhelming and suffocating as I struggled to break free. Panic took over. I rolled hard to one side and managed to shake her off. For one brief second, I saw her face inches from mine, snow stuck in her hair, eyes wide, mouth pulled into that same awful smile. Then she scrambled backward and vanished between the trees. This time, I did not follow. I ran. I do not remember the whole trip back. I remember branches whipping against my coat. I remember slipping twice. I remember checking behind me again and again, expecting to see her coming through the snow. When I finally saw the shape of the trail sign near the parking lot, I almost cried. My car was the only one there. I locked the doors the second I got inside and turned on the interior light. My scarf was twisted loose, and my neck felt raw from the cold. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely start the engine. I drove home without turning on the radio. It's safe to say that I have not walked that trail since. Before you step back out into the quiet, do one thing for me. Hit subscribe to Deep Horror, because out there are still stories waiting. Stories that don't end when the snow thaws. Stories people were never supposed to tell. And if tonight's stories got under your skin, go ahead and like the video. And trust me, you haven't heard the worst of it yet.